You were on Ed Sullivan Show, weren't you?
Well, just about everybody who made music in the 60s did that.
Okay, well, I seem to remember you on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it's funny that you mentioned John Sebastian, the Lovin' Spoonful, because out of a lot of the groups that were coming out and doing their thing, not only on Ed Sullivan, but that's where a lot of the youngest kids were being exposed to it was, you two groups were having more fun than the others. The rest of the Birds and some of them, even though they were cool and groovy, they were so serious. And then especially you personally, if I may say so, when you'd come on stage, man, you were so happy. You just enlightened the whole audience, and everybody seemed to just be getting off on your positive vibes. Is that just you?
I think it sort of goes back to when I was the roadie in the band. I mean, I think there was a reason why I eventually found a place in the group was, I think I used the word spirit. I mean, I always had a good attitude about my performance on stage, and being a part of the group, I kind of found that was sort of my niche in terms of representing what we did on stage. Even in our band, I mean, we had a seriousness in our band, guys who just took themselves really way too serious. Our drummer, our guitarist, and even Howard at the time. So I mean, I sort of broke the mold on that seriousness. I think Zolly Yanowski probably was very influential on me realizing that you could, make music and have a good time. Louis Prima. I grew up in my household. Louis Prima and Keely Smith were a duo that I really picked up on as a youth. I had seen them play live, and even from that, I knew that there was room for having fun on stage and combining that with the musical elements. So yeah, I mean, I never really thought of it as being, okay, I'm going to go out on stage and I'm going to be crazy, or I'm going to be wild, or I'm going to have a good time. It's just, when we were introduced, or even today, I don't really think of it. I've always said that the time I'm on stage is what I really look forward to, and why I continue to tour at all, is for that time that I'm playing live, how it makes you feel, and how much fun I have doing that. So that's just a direct relationship to the reality of the situation. And if it wasn't fun for me in that hour, I mean, I wouldn't be touring. I wish my students in the universities I teach knew that. They need to hear this interview and you ranting about me. They think of me as a very hard-lined professor who gives them grades that they should get higher grades.
Well, I can't, if they only knew. Well, I don't want to just gloss over this Happy Together song, because, I mean, this Happy Together, you talk about how the Beatles songs touch so many people, and, they address the needs and the feelings that the young people were having of the day. Happy Together, I mean, it was a major, and still is, for that matter. I mean, it's still a big impact. Today, it's a major song. What can I say? I mean, it's a tremendous song. It's beautiful vocals, wonderfully arranged, and it must have been very overwhelming even to yourself to have such a hit. That period of time, 1967, for the Turtles was really, that was a hard time. There was a lot of pressure on us. The three records that we had tried to have hits with, their failure, Outside Chance, Can I Get to Know You Better, Grim Reaper, that was the first time we had records out that had not scored in the top 10. And I mean, to have three of them happen right in a row, it really changed the band. It changed us. I mean, not only did we change the personnel of the group, but it really changed the attitude of, that's why I say it was a real crossroads, because I think at that point in time, the necessity for us to accept the fact that, well, you're either going to break up now or you're going to commit yourself to being in the game, the business game. And,
to do that, we had to be a lot more in tune to what was going on in radio, and I say it was really important that we had to establish our own history. We couldn't ride along on the history of being a Bob Dylan folk rock band, or a Lovin' Spoonful prototype singing pop music, or a Byrds psychedelic music changeover, you see. And we had no personality. I don't think we had a sound. So when Happy Together came along, we were very nervous because we didn't really have any place to hang our hats, so to speak. The song it had no groups it sounded like. It had no identity that we could pin a sound on. And so it became, for us, probably the really important part of that was the organization of that record and the arrangement and the sound. And Happy Together would establish for us a sound base for the rest of our career, as it would set up songs like She'd Rather Be With Me, She's My Girl, You Know What I Mean, Eleanor, You Showed Me. I mean, it gave us a new history, and it gave us our own history. I think it really gave us the ability to look at the career of the Turtles, and at that time, from 1962 to 1970, I think the representation of the music of the Turtles really becomes identifiable with the song Happy Together and After. And that 3 years from 67 to 70 becomes musically our most important contribution in music history. The Turtles were young. With all of our hit music, we were still very young. I think in the relationship to most of the groups that we came along with, Roger McGuinn and Chris Hillman and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all of these bands, they were older than us. It doesn't seem that way now because as you get older, for some reason, the ages come closer together. But when you're 20 and John Lennon's 25 or 26 years old, it seems like a tremendous, I'm 18 coming out of high school, and John Lennon's married with a child, and he seemed much older. And most of the artists that we grew up with, Ray Davies and those guys, they're older than us by about 3 or 4 years. But that's a big amount of time in when you're 18 or 19 or 20 years old. You don't have that experience that you do when you're 7 years beyond 18 years old. And so I think that's a big part of it when you're growing up. We were kind of young, and so everything that happened to us happened at a very young age. The band, the Turtles, was over by the time I was turning 23 years old, and I was married. I had 2 children. I had bought my own home. I was involved in the proposition we call life, and at the age of 23, and most of the kids who I had gone to school with were still in college and hadn't even thought about making enough money yet. And if they had to get through the Vietnam War, and then the perpetuation of that life and the movement from the Turtles ending and us moving to the next life, Flo and Eddie, and singing for the next 3 years and working within this next dynamic that would change my life, which was Frank Zappa. And so really my college of the Turtles, my bachelor's degree in music, really was the 5 years or 8 years of the Turtles was really the foundations of my life in music, singing, touring, making records, producing, fighting against the system, the record system. When we went into the era with Frank Zappa, it became really doing our masters. It was like 3 years, and we were doing our masters, and we're singing and working with this musical genius who really challenged us musically in a way that the Turtles had never done. But here we were doing again, chameleon musical life, just like the Turtles, right? We had been this chameleon band making all of these changes until we hit our stride with Happy together. And even then, one of our biggest records was a record where we morphed into these groups during the Battle of the Bands, where we portrayed all of these different bands, where we took on the visual and musical stylings of 12 different groups. And the Turtles Present the Battle of the Bands was a throwback to how we started, and we projected ourselves musically into these different group sounds and visuals. Well, moving into Frank Zappa, it became that all over again, and here we were in this lifestyle, maneuvering through 200 motels, through Absolutely Free, We're Only in It for the Money, Weasels Rip My Flesh, Live at the Fillmore East, Billy the Mountain, Devon, The Sofa, The Fat Floating Sofa. I mean, this became a musical part of our lives that would really challenge us to reach new heights as we, again, metamorphosed through Zappa and would get basically spit out, sort of like a meat grinder, coming out at the end as Flo and Eddie. And as we come out of Flo and Eddie in 1972, we come out as Flo and Eddie at this point in time. 1973, we released the first Flo and Eddie album. So now musically, music has changed. We're into the 70s. Radio has changed from AM radio, and pop music radio has now become FM radio and underground and album-oriented music. And so we sort of become the music industry. We're sort of like the poster child of the dynamics of musical history changing, and we come out as Flo and Eddie, and there is no more AM radio, so to speak. So it's interesting when you put it into perspective and how it sort of feeds off of itself. But it's really I think important that, I mean, when you look at Mark Volman and Howard Kalin, it isn't just the Turtles. I mean, maybe it'd be easier to pigeonhole us if we had just stayed there. But I think when we went into the Mothers of Invention, I think we really upset the apple cart, so to speak, in terms of what critics, music history critics, they didn't know what the hell, how is this possible that these two inane personalities and singers singing this kind of pap could find themselves singing with the most challenging songwriter and musical creator probably ever in music history, in my opinion.
Okay, you've expressed my opinion there too, and you've jumped in a lot of different directions there. You've had a very diverse career, let me tell you. I'm going to get back to that, but I can't let you just jump through all that without commenting on a couple of things here. Before the Mothers and everything, back as the Turtles, you got to tell me about this story. Trisha Nixon, you played at the White House for Nixon?
Well, Trisha Nixon had made a comment in Teen Magazine that we were one of her two favorite bands, and it was just a real innocent comment in the middle of a interview of Teen Magazine interviewing the teen daughter of the President of the United States. So, I mean, I don't think she did it to make friends. I think she was just somebody, they probably asked her, do you like music? And she said yes, and they probably said, well, who are your favorite bands? And she said the Turtles, and we were one of them. I think there were a few others mentioned. We were invited through our management company, got a letter from the White House, from, I guess, secretary there, saying that Tricia had plans to do a party in the White House and was asking if the Turtles would want to play. And we said, of course we would. We, at the time, it probably appeared different than the way we took it. I mean, obviously, at the time, we were, had grown up in a liberal families and had pretty much grown up around liberal friends, and we were probably not the Republican guideline. But that it was the decision we made had no politics to it. It was really just thought it would be fun to do, and we were going to be in the East Coast anyway, playing in New York the same weekend or the weekend before, and so the invitation was just a natural, here was another opportunity to do something new, and at that time, bands that had played the White House had really been bands like, Woody Herman and Dick, the big bands, and Presidents had always had bands there that were pretty much, swing bands, Woody Herman and Glenn Miller and all those type things. So being asked to come in as a rock and roll band to play there was something kind of unique, and it certainly had no political bent, being at the time that we were probably more anti-war, but we took the show and we played it. And it's so funny is that in all of the politics of it, really the President Nixon and his wife were not there that night. They had pretty much left the house to Tricia. We played in the East Room, which was a big ballroom, and they had two stages set up on both sides. The Temptations were on one side and the Turtles were on the other, and we played and then the Temptations played. Most of the politics that came out of that were the fact that Tricia was inviting kids of the people in Washington. So, I mean, the kids that came to this show, their parents, their fathers and mothers, were people that either worked for the White House or were senators' kids or House of Representatives' kids or whatever. So they, in fact, invited a date. So, I mean, the natural extension of this is that not everybody who came to the party favored the politics of Richard Nixon. So that night in the White House, there was a lot of anti-war sentiment and anti-Nixon sentiment being passed around, which was very interesting to see. There was a lot of young kids passing out literature saying, the president, he's terrible, and on and on. So, I mean, we really just took it as a show. I mean, there was never an inkling of political. I mean, we weren't there to deliver a message to the President of the United States.
But it did lead to the president of the U.S. Steel asking you to play for a gig for his daughter. Now, you got to tell me about that, and you got to talk a little bit about how Howard freaked out.
Well, I mean, at that, you have to understand, I mean, our liberalism, a lot of it was based in the fact that we were part of a culture that was changing rapidly. I mean, kids, there was war going on in Vietnam, and there was this separation. There was a line drawn, right? Stephen Stills. There was battle lines had been drawn. There was us against them. It was youth against authority. So really, I mean, when we took the job for the person at U.S. Steel, I mean, again, that was up in San Francisco. We took that job because it seemed like a natural extension of the fact we had played the White House. And what we found is that night, I mean, we were pretty much playing, you know, next to a pool and set up on a stage, and that we played our show, and the audience was very bored and not at all responsive. And I think the reaction of several members in our band was that this was not our audience, and that we really are making decisions managerially. Our management people are making choices that we really don't agree with, and I think Howard's reaction that night, which was, you know, to quit the band and to have a momentary lapse of social, you know, morals, and he saw it as us stepping over that line, that we weren't us anymore, we were them, and we were part of everything we didn't agree with. Whereas at the White House, we didn't feel that way, because the reaction and the response and the show and the party, everything was really a positive, and there was a lot of good feeling, and everybody had a good time. When we went to this other show, it was a lot of young people who were very snooty, and it really was. It wasn't a serious issue. I mean, Howard quit the band for about 4 days. I mean, and within a matter of a few days, everything was back in order. And we really, if anything, we made a decision at that point in time that we weren't going to take any more of those types of shows. But that, nowadays we take those types of shows all the time. So the us and them attitude isn't the same. So it became more of the social disease, right? I mean, we lived in a country at that time that had really separated. It had really become this, you were either part of us or you were part of them. And the us were the anti-war, the politicals, the Jerry Rubins and the Abby Hoffmans and the smoking pot and the kind of intellectuality of that drug taking created, and on and on and on. Kind of the Allen Ginsbergs and the whole Hunter Thompson. And then there was the them side, right? And the them side was all the big business and the supporting of Vietnam. And it was kind of silly, I mean, when you think about it,